So each of the first chapters that we're dealing with here are yogas. So the first chapter is the yoga of dejection. Yoga is those actions that take us to union. So it's taking us to union at this point to the truth of who we are. It's a stage. Once you begin to wake up from your dejection, the second chapter calls that waking up discrimination, the yoga of discrimination. You begin to see what it is that has bound you. You begin to get a sense of what binds you and what doesn't bind you, what frees you and what pulls you back in. This is the beginning of knowledge, true knowledge, the knowledge of the truth of yourself, the knowledge of God, as a directly experienced knowledge, not just information. So the second chapter is pointing to the developing the ability to understand the nature of your dejection, to understand the nature of your condition, and to begin to take actions that take you out of it. And that's the third chapter, the yoga of action. What actions do I take that takes me away from identification with the bondage that I've been suffering and towards that which I am? The more one takes action, the more the discrimination becomes strong and the less dejection one has to go through. The more you take action with this discrimination, the more knowledge is revealed, the more recognition of what is real and what's not real becomes available to, the more the revealing of what binds you and the revealing of what it is that you are that frees you. That revealing process that follows the yoga of action is called the yoga of knowledge. And it's always knowledge of truth, always knowledge of what is real. So this knowledge then, when you have enough knowledge, what's happening is you're beginning to taste and drink your freedom. You're beginning to separate yourself from this pit of bondage, and you have some series of yogas and practices that are taking you out of it, and this sense of who you are in truth gets stronger and stronger. And what happens is you lose the pull to the world. The habits, the addictions, the negativities, the patterns of behavior that have formed your individual identity begin to lose their hold to pull you back. This is the yoga of renunciation in chapter 5. This is when we start naturally losing interest in the toys of our childhood. We begin to grow up. We begin to rise up out of our childhood mush and soup and stew and begin to get a sense of who or what we are, actually. We come out of the who we are and we become more the what we are. And this happens naturally, and it can be assisted by all the previous three: discrimination, action, knowledge, as well as periodically dejection. Kick our butt when we aren't in touch with ourselves. Yes, John.
Just going back, I mean, it seems like this linear process you're talking about can happen on many different levels.
Correct.
So
Very good.
You feel like you're really advanced at one point, and then a year later, like you're way a beginner again.
Yeah, or it may not be a year. It may be the next day.
Right.
So the dejection can accompany us until the end.
The dejection will stay with you until the merger process. And the stability of the merger process. So part of the merger process is the ecstasy and then the agony. The ecstasy and the agony. The agony is the dejection. So it even carries until you've become stabilized in the truth of who you are, which is in the 15th chapter. So yes, it's all concurrent. And it depends upon your systems. Some systems progress more effectively through the action component. Some systems progress more effectively through the awareness, the discrimination component, and the knowledge component. Everybody has their different capacities relative to their ability to make their progress. But all these 5 principles: dejection, discrimination, action, knowledge, and renunciation, are the preparatory process which we will cycle through forever. Because in fact, all of these are necessary even after you have become grounded in who you are, because when you re-enter into matter, the world tries to coat you again. So you have to continuously apply your discrimination. You have to continuously do actions that support who you are. You have to periodically renounce. You have to get back in touch with who you are through knowledge. So this is the means by which the soul continues to disassociate from its habit of identification with matter. Okay, this is where all yoga is. This is where most people are. 95% of seekers are in this process of becoming stable in the self. Now there's a 5%. Of that 95%, there's probably another 20% that have glimpses of the next stages. They come and they go. They come and they could be completely gone, forgotten for lifetimes before they come again. So these glimpses of the universal, this is more rare. It's more common is this movement through what I just described, from dejection until the self, becoming stable in the self. This is really what all teachers try to bring their students to, is to bring them to the state where their self, the identity with yourself as matter, has switched to yourself as spirit. That's the key. Once that has happened, then a process takes you over and it starts doing the rest of the work. So in the Kundalini, the journey of Kundalini, it's the first chakra to the fourth chakra. The sixth chapter is the fourth chakra, when you reside in the heart, when you reside in the being. Because when that residence in the being comes to you, spontaneously you feel the connection. Spontaneously you go into awareness. Okay. So any questions on this? All right. So let's now come back into the Bhagavad Gita, and we're going to pick up from where we left off at the last reading.
All of the sudden, conches, kettledrums, tabors, drums, and cow horns blared forth simultaneously, making a tumultuous sound. Then, seated in the magnificent chariot drawn by white horses, Sri Krishna and Arjuna blew their celestial conches.
Keep going.
Sri Krishna blew his conch Panchajanya, and Arjuna his conch Devadatta, while Bhima, the performer of terrible deeds, blew his mighty conch Paundra. King Yudhishthira, Kunti's son, blew his conch Anantavijaya. Nakula and Sadeva blew their conches Sugosa and Manipushpaka respectfully. Then the ruler of Kashi, an excellent archer, Shikhandi the great warrior, Dhrishtadyumna, Virata, Satyaki the invincible, Drupada and the sons of Draupadi, also the mighty armed sons of Subhadra, blew their respective conches. The tumultuous sound echoed through heaven and earth, rent the hearts of Dhritarashtra's sons.
Okay. So what this part of chapter 1 is addressing is the awakening of the consciousness within the matter. It is an acceleration of what was stuck in the dejection, and suddenly the whole system is becoming activated. It's becoming a crisis. So this is the awakening of the Kundalini, usually in the first and second chakras. This being called to action. It's a suddenly now you've been planning for it, now you've been getting ready for it, now you're going to start acting. So this is the call to action. Usually the entire system at this stage is accelerated, is electrified in this sense of peril, this sense of necessity, this sense of something coming. This process, this is very turbulent. If you read these verses, they're describing it perfectly, because who's becoming most disturbed by it? Rents the hearts of Dhritarashtra's sons. So who's most disturbed by this awakening is the unconscious parts of ourselves, the ego, the habitual parts of ourselves. That's the part that gets disturbed. But the parts of us that is truth becomes enlivened, becomes invigorated, becomes motivated, become capable. So at this stage, we become aware of our capacity for action, our capacity to come forward and meet that which is binding us. Prior to that, we're still the victim. It's very difficult to wake up enough to realize that you have a say about how miserable you've been, or how bound you've been feeling, or how stuck you've been feeling. This is the beginning of waking you up as the authority of your own life. And it's the beginning of the struggle of the truth of you to separate itself from the untruth. Because this force that rises up is not from the ego, it's not from the habitual part of you. It draws its strength from truth itself. It draws its strength from consciousness itself. It can be very disturbing. There was, when I first had my awakening, in my case it went very smoothly, but for most people it's very turbulent. There was such a period of time, there was a website called Kundalini Emergency, and it would describe symptoms of people who were having this kind of awakening. There would be pain, there would be panic attacks, there would be breathing problems, there would be not being able to sleep at night, there would be this endless restlessness and discomfort. These were all symptomatic of this force of consciousness rising up in the individual system, pushing its way to the surface through all this obscurity. So it creates a tremendous amount of turbulence in a person's system unless the system is already ready for awakening. And then what happens is one experiences, perhaps for the first time, the force of consciousness within themselves. And this can be a startling spiritual experience. This can be a casting into a whole nother dimension of being, a much more expanded capacity for presence or love, a glimpse of the gods or the heavens. All of these would be signs that, at least for that moment, the force of the awakening consciousness had a free channel to your surface self. And you could share in something of that which is coming. But for the most part, many people, and even such a person, will go back into the turbulence, will go back into the process. So this awakening of consciousness is the beginning of an internal transformation process, but at this stage we have no discrimination. This stage we don't know what's going on. This stage we feel like we're the victim, or that it happened to us. We tend to take it very personally. If it was a great experience, you'll think exalted, you'll think you're God, you think you've found it, you're the one, and you'll proclaim, your ego will take over and proclaim itself as a realized being, until someone catches on. The ego will take over will take it over and convert it into its own thing, and you will fall back eventually into a diminished state of consciousness. And the dejection will even be more poignant. And in that process, your discrimination gets better. You said, okay, well, I guess that wasn't really it. For me, when it happened, I had this experience, and when it quieted towards the next day, after my first awakening experience, I said, I was one of those Maslow peak experiences, Hey, clock that up, I had one of those, that's interesting. And I went into my day. So I had an attitude towards this thing that I knew these things come and go, which was very helpful. I knew they didn't mean any more than what had happened. And I knew it was a beautiful glimpse, but I didn't have a clue what to do about it. I didn't know how to take this and put it into action. I didn't know what it meant. I had no discrimination. Okay, any questions on that part? Okay, so Sachmai, go ahead and keep reading.
Seeing the sons of Dhritarashtra ready for the battle, Arjuna raised his bow and said to Sri Krishna, "Please place my chariot in the middle of the two armies, and keep it there until I have surveyed these warriors who have assembled for battle and have found out with whom I will have to fight. Let me scan all the well-wishers of the evil-minded son of Dhritarashtra who have assembled here to fight."
Let's pause right there. So, you hang on to it. Oh yeah, no, I'll hang on to it. So basically Arjuna's feeling his oats. He's feeling jazzed. He's feeling like, yeah, I can do this. This looks good. I'm the one. Show me who I'm here to kill. What is it that's going on here? Show me how I can convert this into something that will serve my ego. Okay, then go on.
Sanjaya said, "O king," being thus addressed by Arjuna, Sri Krishna placed the magnificent chariot in the middle of both armies. In front of Bhishma, Drona, and other kings, and said, "Partha, behold all these opposing armies of the Kurus assembled here." Arjuna saw fathers, grandfathers, teachers, maternal uncles, brothers, sons, grandsons, and friends, all standing there ready to fight. He also saw fathers-in-law and well-wishers in both armies. Seeing all the relatives and friends standing on the battlefield, eager to fight, he was filled with deep remorse and with sadness spoke thus.
Okay. Oh shit. That's what it was. Oh shit. What am I up against? Now, notice who allowed him to come to that oh shit moment. Krishna is the one who drove the chariot between the two armies. The divine in Arjuna was the one who allowed him to see what it was that this was heralding, that what this was about. And Arjuna had a glimpse of his ego. He had the first glimpse of how vested he was because of his attachments. The Dhritarashtra, the Kauravas, represent all our human addictions, all our human ideas of itself, from the lowest to the highest. It's all our various qualities of human nature, our envy, our jealousy, our pride, our conceit, our need to control and dominate and be right. It's our sense of worth, our sense of power, our diminished sense of worth, our powerlessness, our meaninglessness, our hopelessness. It is all these things we have believed to be true. Some of them are qualities that we're very attached to, that became very critical for our sense of self-worth and who we are in the world and what other people think of us. Some of these are also obstacles, barriers, veils. So in this moment, for a brief instant, Arjuna saw the problem. Okay, continue.
Arjuna said, "Krishna, seeing these relatives arrayed for battle, my limbs give way, my mouth is parched, my body trembles, and my hair stand on end. The Gandhava is slipping from my hands, and my skin is burning. I am unable to stand, and my head is reeling. And Kasava, I am seeing inauspicious omens, and find no good in killing my kinsmen in this battle."
Let's hold off on that verse. I want to talk about the symptoms that Arjuna is experiencing. So, unlike early dejection, where we don't really know what's happening at this point is, because of the activation of the Kundalini, it's starting to push up issues into the surface consciousness. So Arjuna is beginning to experience, as the seeker is, the nature of what it is that's before him, even before his mind has the discrimination, the mental clarity. He just knows he feels awful. He just knows he feels like the oh shit moment. I feel like shit. He just knows this is wrong, right? And who's saying it's wrong? Ego's saying it's wrong. Because the ego has its own harmony. It's come to this point by kind of getting all its aspects to collaborate together. And when this force came in, it's a disturbance, it's a change, right down in the fundamental structure of your identity. And it just feels wrong. And so what do people do with this wrong feeling? Well, you take medication for it. You go see your psychiatrist. You go and get treatment, right? Or you go get drunk, or you get laid. Anything but to be with this. But in this case, what Arjuna does is he rationalizes and justifies why he shouldn't continue.
Krishna, I am not desirous of victory or kingdom or pleasures. What is the use of all this happiness or even life to us? Those for whose sake we desire kingship, happiness and pleasure are all arrayed here, risking their lives and wealth. Teachers, fathers, sons and grandsons, maternal uncles, fathers-in-law, brothers-in-law, and all other relatives are here. Krishna, I do not want to kill them, even if they are ready to kill me. Not to speak of the gains on earth. Even the lordship over the three worlds will not prompt me to kill them. What would we gain by killing the sons of Dhritarashtra, except sin, even though they are the aggressors? Therefore, we should not kill the sons of Dhritarashtra and other relatives, for how can one be happy after killing his own kinsmen? Even though they are unable to see the evil of destroying their own family and committing treachery to friends due to greed, why should we not desist from this sinful act, as we can clearly see the evil that will follow the destruction of our clan?
All right. Sounds like Arjuna's convincing himself. If you look at the nature of rationalization and justification, right, is to convince ourselves why we don't take the required action, why not to do it. Now, let's look at the nature of this, because there's multiple aspects to this allegory. One of the aspects is just what I am describing, that what the mind does when the awakening happens is try to find a rationalization or justification why it's occurring and try to make it stop so you can feel better, right? And it's just a total ignorance. You don't know what's going on, so you're treating it as if it was a physical problem or perhaps a psychological problem. But in this particular case, there is another way of looking at it, and that is, what is it that is making this impossible to go forward for Arjuna? Is his attachment. It's his affection. It's his love, his sense of identity that came from the community he was born into, and the shared life experiences he had with his cousins and his teachers and other important people, the people who he admired, who he shaped his sense of self from, who were in the positive sense, the formation of his positive ego, because he was a successful man, successful in the world. He was accomplished in the world. So he had a lot of influences that were positive. So he had gratitude, but he also had sentiment and attachment. And the idea of destroying these was intolerable to his surface consciousness, even though they were trying to destroy him. So in the allegory, we have this struggle between the dark side and the light side, the good and the bad. So we're attached to things that bind us. The very nature of identity is repetition and agreement. You make something real, even if it's not real, by repeating it enough and get enough people to agree with you. Falsehood is nothing but repetition and agreement. Republicans are being very effective in this these days. So but it's a strategy that's existed throughout ages. Repetition and agreement. Well, this is what happens. Your relatives are the agreement for you. They're the ones that says, oh yes, you deserve to exist. Oh yes, you're okay. Oh yes, that's the best part. Usually there's all the other side. So we become attached to these affirmations and these confirmations of who we are as separate beings. Spiritual awakening is not only the end of the dark side and the obscuring side, it's also the end of the happiness, the human happiness, the human pleasure, the human comfort, the human security, the human familiarity, those little pleasures that make life worth living. It doesn't care when truth wakes up. It sees these all are only simply attachments, structures by which we have been favorably hooked in versus unfavorably hooked in. So of course, we're going to rationalize and justify why to keep them in place. Right? We're moralistic people, we're good people, and we also know what feels good. So we'll hang on to what feels good versus what doesn't feel good. And what doesn't feel good is not to have what feels good. So this process is really a difficult process to collaborate with at the beginning, because it runs counter to everything your ego has been organized around. The good and the bad, the pleasurable and the unpleasurable, the beloved, those who loved you and those who didn't love you, those you got along with and those you didn't get along with, your attractions and your repulsions. They're both included as identified, as bondage. What hooks us in? Happiness hooks us in. Love hooks us in. Attention hooks us in. Recognition hooks us in. As much as rejection, as much as judgment and complaint or dissatisfaction or criticism. They all hook us in. Either side of this, what's that, tetradome? Metrodome that goes back and forth, right? So you can, metrodome, that you can play.
Metronome.
Gnome. So you can play your music. Happiness and sorrow, pleasure and pain. This is the music. This is the music we all dance to. We know it or not. This is about ending the movement. It's about getting rid of the metronome. It is a complete different thing. Utterly outside of human ideas. It's not about nobility. It's not about greatness. It's really not about an accomplishment unless you consider undoing that which would want accomplishment, an accomplishment. So of course, he would rationalize and justify not to go forward. Not only is he feeling like crap, he cannot, in his any imagination, understand why he would have to destroy all these loved ones, all the things that helped form his sense of worth and who he was. Okay, so you're beginning to get what a truth book is about. You're beginning to get a sense that we're talking not about a happy human accomplishment here. We're not talking about being a better human. We're talking about a complete different paradigm, of a complete different order. Okay, continue.
When the clan is destroyed, the age-old family virtues disappear, and vice takes over the entire race. Krishna, with the preponderance of vice, the women of the clan will become corrupt, and that will lead to a mixture of castes. Intermixture of castes will lead to hell for the destroyers of the clan, and also bring down the entire race. This will lead to cessation of ancestral offerings. Thus, the intermixture of castes that is caused by the destroyers of the kinsmen will destroy the traditional customs and rites. Krishna, we have heard that men who have lost their clan traditions dwell in hell permanently. What a pity! We are bent upon committing such a great sin of killing our own kinsmen just for the sake of the pleasure of the crown. It will be better for me if the weapon-wielding sons of Dhritarashtra kill me in this battlefield when I am unarmed and unresisting. Sanjaya said, Saying thus, Krishna, whose mind was agitated by grief, threw down his bow and arrow on the battlefield and sat silently in the chariot.
So this thus ends the first chapter of Gita. So you can see this is trying to reveal something of the nature of dejection. True dejection is a fundamental recognition that it's all a lie. And this difficulty in the consciousness to be present with it. It is the destruction of everything. So the Gita is talking about Arjuna getting a glimpse of the nature of what he's doing from the point of view of his ego, from the point of view of his attachment, from the point of view of his ethics and morality, from the point of view of his good traditions, from the point of view of society and the harmony and the effectiveness of the cultural order, the traditions. So he's seeing that this utter destruction is wrong. And if I have to take part of this, I'd rather die. I'd rather be killed, rather be overtaken, rather forget this awakening, not experience this awakening, go back to sleep, go back to unconsciousness, go back into not knowing. I don't want to know. I don't want to experience this.
This lifetime.
This next lifetime after that. So he's talked himself out of this, you see. Now, of course, it's complicated because he said he was the great warrior of the 5 Pandavas. He is the real warrior. He's the one with all the celestial weapons and all the capacities. And he's saying, I can't do this. It's a paralyzing moment in the journey of consciousness. When it comes enough along the journey that it gets a glimpse of where it's headed. Now, it's never as horrific as the ego sees it. It's actually wonderful, but at the moment where you're entering into the next stage of your evolution, what you see first is the darkness. What you see first is the unworkability of it relative to what you've done or what you've known. Try to get a child to come out of the sandbox. It's at first it's about leaving behind the sandbox. He doesn't know about what's going to happen next. He doesn't know about riding bicycles or playing baseball or being with their friends or all the other kinds of things. It just likes his little sandbox. So it's this unwillingness to change, unwillingness to let go of what you know, this resistance. So he wants to go back to denial. He doesn't want to know this even exists. It's actually quite a high state. I have people come to me sometimes in that state. I'm just thrilled. I'm just thrilled. And they're telling me how awful it is. And I can't help stop my smiling. Because I know it's a true glimpse. It's a true showing of that which is not yet known. But from the vantage point of ego, it looks awful. It looks like you're undoing. From the vantage point of truth, it looks like your freedom. That's why they call it the gateless gate. Because from the side of ego, it looks like there's a barrier. But from the side of truth, there is no barrier. But at the time, it is looking formidable, impossible. These moments occur along the spiritual path on regular intervals. The more you're with the teacher, the more often they occur. Because the delaying and the resisting and the denying aspects of the ego can't hold up. And you keep being shown what is the next thing you have to let go of. What is the next thing you have to stop doing? What is the next thing that's keeping you stuck that you don't know how to stop? So it looks like too much. It looks like you can't do it. It's not possible. And that's where you stop. Learning to be in these moments and not believe them is the key of going beyond dejection. Now what you have to know is Krishna was right next to Arjuna this whole time. If it was Krishna was not in the scene, Arjuna probably would not have had this experience. He would just gone and slaughtered his relatives. But he wouldn't have had this philosophical moment. He wouldn't have had this perspective. He wouldn't have seen the consequences, which was the end of his life as he knows it, without the presence of Krishna. And that's the key here. It's when the light of truth has come sufficiently bright. That's when we come out of the morass of our identification with matter and begin to recover who we are as spirit. Until then, we fall back in. If Arjuna had done what he had done, he'd gone out and lived in the woods, being a sannyasi, avoiding his relatives, hiding out, hiding in caves. And this happens many people spend lifetimes and lifetimes popping out and falling back in because they don't want to change. Popping out and falling back in because it looks too hard, or you don't even want to see it there, and you obscure yourself so you don't even have to see it. It takes something else to create a sufficient momentum to push against the tide of the habit of ego, the collective tide of the habit of ego, and to begin to really enter the path, this yoga.
You know, there's a really juicy phase in there where you get the taste of transcendence, but you still get the flesh.
Yes.
And it's like, can't I
Both.
just have both?
Yes. But the dejection makes it, that happens all the way along the journey, especially when things start getting good again, where you get this new ego that can handle the spiritual path. And then that's when you really start negotiating. You start negotiating with, is there a way to do this where I can keep the best parts and just get rid of the bad parts?
A lot of yogis get stuck there, huh?
Oh, yes. Without the presence of a Krishna, you can't keep proceeding. Because we don't have sufficient light at the start of the journey. There's not sufficient freedom for the force to move in our system in order to keep us moving. Okay, you understand the nature of this first phase? This is the gist of what we're trying to get to in the Bhagavad Gita. This is tangibly, you can experience. The Gita is describing really what happens. Now, it took me a long time to move through the story part and get to the essence. But once I began to match my experience with the understanding, I started seeing, that's what was happening. That's what was going on in me. That's what is going on with me. I'll get a glimpse of the next thing and I retreat. Because my consciousness doesn't know how to hold it. Even at the highest, even when I came to the Sat realization, it looked like a dark ship. And I was complete, insignificant, floating on the ocean. It was just a shock to how huge this was. Non-existence is what it was. And that's what each one of these are. Because from the vantage point of consciousness, it doesn't know it can't exist. Consciousness doesn't know consciousness doesn't know it can die. It doesn't even think of death or not death, living. It's only ego that thinks of these things. So consciousness doesn't have an issue with existence or non-existence. It's not it's not there, it's not real for it. It's both. It's existing and it's non-existing at the same time. But for ego, it looks like the end of you. It looks like non-existence. So the part of you that experiences terror when you have a moment of glimpse of truth, then it's your ego. That's your ego in terror. Your being isn't in terror. Your being is what's there when the terror goes away. If you ever notice, it's hard to keep terror up. It's hard to stay in a state of terror. And those who are actually on a very high state, but you end up wrecking your body, stay in a state of terror, so you're prescribed medications in our society. So this struggle between existence and non-existence is not real. But from the point of view of the ego, it is real. It looks real. So what Arjuna had was a glimpse of the end of ego. But truth always looks like your worst nightmare at first. It keeps showing up as the thing that you don't want to experience. And for Arjuna, because of the poignancy of the situation, because of the vested forces that were at play, he was brought to that moment of recognition of what he was up to. And his ego just wanted to retreat and hide. And if Krishna hadn't been there, that's just what he would have done. Okay. So let's finish with a meditation.